First, I want to thank Jaco Moretti Fine Arts for hosting this exhibition and this talk. And I am Frank Rodriguez, and I have been editing and collaborating with Blake Little for 15 years and 6 books, including this last one, Construction Nudes, which is why we're here. And Blake has been photographing for 45 years, an illustrious career, award-winning career. And you may know his work from Preservation, which is a body of work with people covered in honey, and that went around the world. That book sold out. And he also did a book on gay rodeo in the late '80s when Blake was actually in the rodeo, and he was a bull rider. And so he, being part of the community, actually documented it, and that body of work has traveled to 7 museums?
Over 10.
Over 10 museums.
From
so it really
traveled for 5 years.
I mean, really, you captured the beginning of that whole gay rodeo movement.
Yeah.
But while that was happening, he was also photographing celebrities, and he's photographed everyone from Tom Cruise to Colin Powell to
Julianne Moore.
No, who just passed away that was on that mid-century modern show, who had played Alice? Linda Lavin, R.I.P. He photographed her. Everybody, basically magazine covers, book covers, movie posters, and that's how, we collaborated when I had a design company and we did movie posters together. So we've worked together for many, many years, and he called me recently and said, I want you to come over and look through my archive with me, and let's just see what's in there. Because a lot of the stuff is from the 80s and is on as analog. It's all on contact sheets. So in that exciting dig through the archives, we found what became Construction Nudes. And it was a series, it was actually his first series that he did after graduating from college and moving to Los Angeles in 1980. So Blake moved to LA at a time when LA was just sort of growing up as a city and becoming an international city. It was getting ready to host the Olympics. There was so much construction everywhere, building skyscrapers and everything. And at the same time, the gay community was just sort of finishing the honeymoon of liberation. And so 1980 was right before the plague was hitting. And so as Blake started doing this photography of this exhibit, that became a shadow that influenced and spoke to everything that you see. So anyway, it was very exciting to find this work and go through all the contact sheets, and it was like a treasure trove. It was so exciting, and I feel like it's really important work, and it sort of speaks to it speaks to Los Angeles and also the time in gay life, but also this work was sort of being done concurrently with the work that Bruce Weber was doing and Herb Ritts was doing. So it's very much the part of the 80s renaissance of male nude photography, right?
Right.
So anyway, how did you start, and what was your inspiration for this project? Do you remember your first shoots for what became Construction Nudes?
Yeah, so during that time, there was a lot of construction going on, and there were construction sites all over LA. And when I was in school, I mostly concentrated on architectural photography, some portraiture and stuff, but a lot of architectural photography. So when I saw all this construction going on, I was fascinated and wanted to go into these buildings. But I've also been always fascinated by brutalist materials, steel, glass, dirt, and so I snuck into these construction sites, found my way in. But when I got in there, it was so fantastical, these tableaus of places that were so unusual and almost created by the process of construction, that I felt I really had to bring models there, more than just taking pictures of the actual architecture itself. So that's kind of where everything started.
But do you remember like the first time you snuck into one of these buildings? I mean, were you driving around and you just saw a construction site and you're like, I need to go and look in that? I mean, you'd already been doing architectural photography in college, so that was something that you were used to, shooting buildings, shooting structures.
Yeah, I basically was just fascinated by what would be in there and the materials and seeing the beginnings of the raw structure of the building. And so I just found my way in through fences, and usually I would always go there also on the weekend when I knew there might have been a security person, but I could get in rather than, obviously not when they were, the workers were working.
So when you brought models into these spaces, how did you find the models? Were they people you knew? Did you put out an ad? And also, you were, what, early 20s?
23.
23.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that the people in your photographs were around the same age as you.
Yeah, everybody was close to my age. And now when I do a project like the preservation project, I do big castings. And I cast through, for real people, I cast for dancers for that project. But this project, it was such an early stage that most of the people were people that I knew from the gym or through friends or friends of friends. So I didn't really cast for this. And because of that, I photographed many of the models repeatedly. So you'll see there's several people that have, several models in the work where there's at least 15, 20 pictures in the book.
And different combinations of the same models.
Combinations.
Yeah. So those models, did they sort of get into the whole spirit of sneaking into these spaces to make this art? I mean, did you get a sense of like, were they excited to do this, or was it more?
All of them had great bodies and worked out at the gym and were proud of the way they look. So I think that was maybe their first reason for wanting to be photographed. But I think we were also young, that there wasn't really, oh, well, I can't go in there, we're gonna get caught or whatever. It was just very adventurous, and they were sort of all in with me, both, creatively and energetically to make these pictures.
So it's like the fearlessness of youth. Like
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
you and they were all sort of in it together to create this stuff.
And now people, we've kind of framed around, oh, we were sneaking in. I didn't even really think of it back then as sneaking in. I was just, doing what I wanted to make these pictures, and I found these environments. So it wasn't even, I didn't even think of it as like, oh, this is illegal or anything. We just kind of did it.
You're still sneaking in. You're still.
Yeah, I'm still sneaking in.
Yeah.
I started doing pictures of the development of there's like $5 and $10 million houses out by the tram road, and I've been photographing stuff in there recently.
Not models, but just
No,
architecture.
but it's sort of sneaking in.
It is. Yeah. Well,
Anyway.
It's funny because in 1980 or 81 or 82, gay men, a lot of times the way they connected was through anonymous sex in public places, parks or whatever.
Right.
So you guys are sneaking in to make art, not to have sex.
Right. And then and then also there's been a reference, Ryan Linkoff, who wrote the foreword for the book, who's at the Lucas Museum. He was fascinated by how the interiors reminded him of cruising places. So the architectural interiors, he referenced how it reminded him of cruising, like places where people would cry, cruising zones. And there is kind of a mystery to it, because all the workers are gone, and there's this really interesting environment. And when you go in there, you see the reminiscence of the workers, like,
Well, it's like
this shelf, this thing right here, where Armando's lying on the shelves. The workers built that to store all of their tools and lunch stuff, and they also had built like a picnic table and 2 picnic benches in that same room. So
they didn't know
when
that
you-
people would be naked sitting on their picnic table either.
And when you walk in there, it's like this weird room, like walking into some dining room, and with this like finely crafted shelving out of plywood.
That's just temporary, like everything.
Right.
Because these spaces would change from week to week as the building would evolve. Whatever the foundation would be that you would shoot in, 3 weeks later it would be completely different because they would be at a different stage in the construction. So it's like the theater's set would constantly evolve.
Right.
If you went back to the buildings
Right.
that like the one that Armando's pulling back the curtain.
Armando in the city, yeah.
Yeah, Armando in the city. That building is. Where is that? Isn't that across from the Wiltern?
Yeah, well, he's pulling back and you can see down Wilshire Boulevard. And it's right across from the Wiltern Theater.
It's some boring office building now, but it makes a nice photograph.
Right.
So, who were your heroes at the time that you were doing this photography? Like, what people influenced your work photographically?
I think that the main influence on all of my photography was Irving Penn. But then for this series, since they're male nudes, Bruce of LA was a big influence, the physique photographer, Mapplethorpe. And then later on, contemporaries like Herb Ritts, Bruce Weber. But that influence probably, when I think about it now, probably came after this series, of the people that were kind of like my contemporaries or slightly older than myself.
Let's see. Oh, I know what I want to ask you. The thing about some of the poses to me look very like modern dance poses. So, were you influenced by? Were you a fan of modern dance at the time? And when you're 23, you just arrived in LA. Are you going to see modern dance? Was that something? Because especially some of the ones with the 2 figures and they're like on top of each other. It's in the book. You can really see some of those poses look very theatrical and like a dance pose, like Joffrey Ballet or something like that. Like what? Were you a fan?
Yeah, and in '80, when I first moved to LA, I saw a performance of Pina Bausch, and the performance was on a stage. It was one dance for over an hour, and the stage was filled with like 6 inches of dirt, and all the dancers' costumes were white, and they danced this modern dance for an hour until they were completely covered in dirt, and that dance and that concert completely like changed my reference to art and had a really big influence on me. And and at the time I don't think I was thinking of that, but I can see how that and, like you said, the Joffrey Ballet, which I also saw, influenced the posing in the way that I was working with the models. And then in addition to that, after like the first year, AIDS started happening, and the very beginning of it, and so that also influenced the way I was posing the models. And again, a lot of this is subconscious. Like I don't really set out to like make a statement or create a photograph to about a specific subject or anything, but a lot of the posing and the way I was working with the models was like subconscious in the way that I see the effect of loss and death in the work.
Well, I mean, I remember 1982 or 83, just the amount of fear and confusion from when I was in college about what was going on. But for you, do you remember the first thing you heard about it, or the first person that you knew that was sick? Like, what do you remember about that?
Yeah, at the time, my partner John Sonsini was a painter. His close friend and a close friend of mine was the first person. Chris Johnson was the first person that died of AIDS. So
That you knew.
has a huge effect on me, and we all lived through that. So we all lost so many friends, especially people my age and slightly younger than myself.
Yeah.
So,
Around the same time, you did through your connection with your partner at the time, John Sonsini, the L.A. painter, amazing painter. You did a whole portrait series of L.A. artists, including like Ed Ruscha and Baldessari and Hockney. Being exposed to all those big personalities, big figures at that tender age, did that influence what you were doing at all? Like, how did that work? Because that portrait series is really like one of the first series you did of switching from architecture to people.
So when I moved to LA, I started working for Bonnie Shipman. I came and was assisting for different photographers, and Bonnie Shipman is a Rolling Stone people photographer. And so as soon as I started, and I'd already kind of shifted away from architecture, because I found that architecture was like recording, and photographing people was creating. So I'd already started shifting away from architecture, like I said, and so since John was my partner and I knew all these artists and I was fascinated by the art world, I started asking to photograph all these LA artists. And through that series actually is how I got my first assignments in the entertainment industry. So from that series of portraits, I used that portfolio to get hired by some magazines, and then through those magazines, I got into the entertainment industry.
So, going through all this work, looking at this stuff all these years later out of your archive, did you get any insights about how you work based on seeing this stuff? Like putting together construction nudes, looking at all this work, that's basically your first post-academic work. How did it teach you anything about the next 40 years of how you shoot, how you photograph?
Yeah, I think it was one of the first times when I was combining architecture and people. And so architecture was my first area of study, and then portraiture came after that. So when I started photographing people, I'm concerned about the person in the space, how the foreground, background, the subject and the space and the architecture, the architecture work together. And so that is really the foundation of how I still photograph. And I always compose my pictures in the camera. I hardly ever crop the pictures. So even if I'm just shooting a portrait with a simple background, I'm still always interested in, it's important to me how the subject relates to the background and the setting that they're in.
I think that this whole series is all about juxtaposition
Yeah.
of like flesh versus concrete, soft and hard together in one space. And I think that if people are familiar with the books you've done of male portraits, the last like 4 books, they're always about a portrait of someone but interacting in a space, whether it's their space or it's something that you found. And it's that juxtaposition, and I mean, to me, that's what makes your portraits.
Standard.
Well, they're more complex than a lot of other people who shoot portraits. So to me, that this work really speaks to the beginning of that, and it's because you're taking the discipline of architectural photography and then portrait photography and merging them. And with this, these are more like body studies, but still, it's the juxtaposition that's so interesting. And you do it all the time. I mean,
Right.
your composition is what I think is really something that stands out.
The composition and sort of normal but abnormal spaces.
Yeah.
Like I love finding something interesting in the normal, what someone else might just pass over, and then I also think that reflects something about the subject that I'm shooting. I try to bring something in the background that reflects something about the person that makes that part of the portrait of them and says something about
It informs the photograph.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
something about the subject.
Okay, and also, this is all analog work because this is done in the early 80s, and now you shoot digitally. But what formats were you shooting then, and how were you able to actually shoot in these spaces, like bringing gear up, like 8 flights to shoot the curtain reveal picture of Armando? Like, how did you do that?
Well, over half the pictures were made with the 4x5 camera. And I don't know if you guys know the 4x5 camera, but if you've seen it in film or TV, it's the camera where you have a cloth that you put over your head. And the limitations of that are that each you put the film canister into the camera, and you can only have, each one only holds two pictures. So I think I probably had 15 or 20 of those, so that limits me to like 30 or 40 pictures. So that really made photographing with that camera very precise and not a lot of exposures. Like now you have digital, you can take 1,000 pictures, but it made you really refine what you were doing and be very deliberate. And I think you can kind of see how in many of the pictures it's kind of deliberate, how the model is very much placed in the environment. And also when I would scout the locations, I kind of knew exactly where I was going. So, and I would pick out the spots where I was going to photograph because I knew that I didn't have that much time to, in case, someone did come or whatever. And so that also really influenced how the pictures were made. But then also, since I was experimenting and young, I was, like now I use one camera. But there I also used a 120 camera, medium format camera. And then when we went all the way to the 14th floor for the picture of Armando and Wilshire Boulevard, I couldn't carry that camera up 14 floors, so we had the 35 millimeter. So,
yeah. And the models that you shot, did you stay in touch with them as years went on, or was it just you did this project and then you were on to the next? Well, you're always on to the next project, but like, did you keep in contact with any of the models? You know what happened to some of the people that appear in the book?
Yeah, unfortunately, many of the models have passed away. A bunch of them, I don't know where they are. I've tried to find them, and I couldn't find them. But I did find Steve, and Steve's the cover model, and he's also with Andre in about 10 of the pictures. And there's also single pictures of Steve in the book. I think Steve's got about 20 pictures in the book. So,
Steve, do you want to talk about what you remember?
Sure.
I want to let you come up here.
Oh, okay. Well, we first started working together, and that was the first day we worked together, that photograph.
you have a better memory than me.
I remember because we didn't know each other at all. a friend of mine and yours introduced us,
Okay.
and I didn't know what to expect. We went to that location, and you had this idea of getting up on those rebars, and I was like, okay. And then I was hooked. So we worked together just as, without any other models, without Andre, for probably a couple of months, maybe.
Yeah.
And it was exciting, and it was kind of fun and something to do on the weekends, and always Blake being very focused on what he was doing, and at the same time we were both listening and being very aware that maybe there was a car door slamming or footsteps or somebody coming.
Right.
And what are we going to do? Is there an escape route in somewhere? So that was always sort of in the back of, certainly in my mind. You were maybe a little more focused on making art. And then after we'd worked together for a while, you said, I have another model that I want you to work with. And you brought Andre in.
Right.
And Andre was just the nicest guy. We hit it off instantly, and suddenly it was like 2 against 1. So we could kind of in between shots, because there's always a big bit of downtime and dead time while he's setting and focusing
Figuring out
and
my
everything.
composition.
Yeah, all that.
Where I'm shooting, yeah.
Yeah, and moving cameras around and
Right.
figuring the lighting. So we could kind of sit off to the side and at least watch and just hang out together. But there wasn't a moment after meeting that I don't think that Andre and I, ever had a moment of feeling ill at ease about being together in a
Naked.
in a job site,
Right.
in a random building somewhere, other than being freezing cold and it being damp and all the discomfort of where we were. Other than that, we had a great time, and climbing the fence and the excitement of just kind of, what if we get caught? No, it was still fun.
Yeah.
Did he put you in any dangerous situations? Where on that rebar, was it scary?
Well, I mean, I wasn't that far off the ground. He had to help me. You boosted me up.
Right.
So, it was, the bars were about here.
But
It
it is pretty amazing that you guys, I think maybe some of the guys that I photographed today wouldn't even get up there. So the fact that you guys were so into it and went along with every challenge that I sort of set, and I didn't even think too much about this is beyond acceptable to ask these guys. I just had an idea of what I wanted them to do and how I wanted it to look. And, like I said, I would go there on Saturdays, scout each location, and know where I wanted to shoot. So I really had a specific idea of where I was going to shoot and kind of how I wanted to pose them. So they were always on board to kind of just go with it,
And
go
then-
with the flow and do it.
Yeah. It was a different time. I mean, there's no way you could get into a work site, a job site today without cameras and mobile uplinks, and there would be security there within 5 minutes. They would see people skulking around, and so there's just no way any of these could be shot the way that we were doing this 43 years ago.
Right.
So yeah, and it was kind of a shock. 5 months ago when you said, "Oh, I'm going to publish those pictures from way back," and
Because we hadn't spoken. I think we spoke about 12 years ago in LA.
No,
Or was
we
it-
talked here once.
No, yeah, but before that.
Before that, it was a long, long time ago.
Yeah, maybe 15 years.
Did you guys ever show? Did you ever show the work in the '80s? Did you
Yeah.
exhibit it?
Yeah, at James Turcotte Gallery.
What year?
I had a little show in '84.
'84.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been seen since '84.
Right. And back then, in the '80s, I guess because everything was analog and film, all the like a 16 by 20 photograph was huge. So all the photographs in the show were small.
Yeah, I've never seen them this size
Yeah.
until
So
Saturday.
it's great to see them this big, and because they were shot, especially the 4x5s, they could be blown up like 4 times this and really hold up.
Yeah.
I want you to talk about what you're doing now, what you're how living in the desert has influenced your work and what you're shooting currently.
Right. It's interesting that people talk about Palm Springs, that the desert, but for me it's the mountains, and how close we are to the mountains. So I've been doing a series I call Coachella Valley Anthropogenic, and they're landscape pictures, but it's how man's influence on the landscape. So there's almost always some either a man-made element in the landscape picture, or you can see man's influence on the landscape.
For better or worse.
Right. So,
And what's the other series?
and then I'm also doing a series that I tentatively titled Golden Years, where I'm photographing our community, LGBTQ plus community over 65. So the whole range of from trans to non-binary to leather community to sorry. That's it. Yeah.
And there what I like about the series is a celebration of people living their best life, and because so much of LGBT culture has been all about youth, and this area is one of the places where that's not the story at all. The story is people flourishing over 60 or over 65, and just enjoying this community together. And I think that these photographs that you're shooting now are really celebrating that. It's pretty special and really unique, because a lot of people, when they hit a certain age, they just sort of give up, and I feel like this is not that community at all. And so I'm excited for everyone to get to see these pictures when they're ready.
Yeah, and I think people come to Palm Springs to reinvent themselves, but also to live out their who they are, their personality, and to embrace that. And the community embraces that. So it's kind of known as a retirement community, but it's also a place where people can live out their full lives, and I want to show that in the series.
And they're really fun and yeah, a lot of depth too. Well, I think this is a point where we should ask if anyone has questions for
anybody
Blake
have any
Little.
questions?
Or maybe not.
When you were in the construction sites, was it one model at a time, or did you have, I mean obviously there you had 2, but was it generally just one you were working with, or did you have a whole group at the same time?
I think the most was 2, but often 1. I would say as it progressed, I started using 2 models at the same time. And then also as it progressed, I was more interested in the interaction between the models and what narrative that projected in the photos. So the more the project progressed, the more I used 2 models together.
So there's even a couple with 3. There's a couple photographs.
Yeah. Oh, actually, there was one with 4 models.
Yeah.
Lee, I
Yeah.
wonder, because it's black and white, and especially, the light and shadows are so important, yet time of day was a bit of a limit for you. But maybe you shot on weekends when time of day was not a limit. Can you speak about that, about how you decided, you went to a site, you decided where you wanted to shoot, but how about time of day?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because they're inside and interiors, light, time of day is less important. For instance, like the one where Armando's lying on the shelves, that was actually underground, on the lower floors, like where the parking would be in a high rise. And so that was fluorescent light. Another example is Armando in the city, since he's on the inside, that picture I actually strobe lit. There's one strobe light hitting him from the side. So it ideally would be better to shoot at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, even in that situation. But since we're in an interior, it's a little less crucial. Like where now, if I'm shooting in the desert, although I have experimented with shooting in the middle of the day, just to create a different light. But most of the time, I love the day at the very end of the day, and I also love the light. Actually, the half an hour after the sun goes down. But because they were in interiors, that thing about shooting at the very end of the day was a little less crucial.
Did you have light in that picture? Did you use the light from the building? Or
That's fluorescent light.
Yeah, but I mean, so was the power on? Did you turn the light on?
No, they leave the light off.
Oh, so the light was on.
They
when you
leave
came
almost
in.
all the lights on.
All right. Sure.
I'm curious, when you were talking about shooting on 4x5
Yeah.
versus what we all know today of digital, and I look at all these photos and I see, in so many of them, I see all this beautiful movement. You were talking about dance, right? And to see movement, right? So you're talking about 4x5, you've got 2 shots. So did you set everything up, bring the models in, and rehearse in frame, in camera, before you actually hit the shutter? Like, I'm just curious about the process.
I probably might, I don't know if I would call it rehearsing,
Yeah.
but I would kind of tell them what I want. When I'm photographing, I'm very specific about how I work with the model. I almost never say, oh, well, do something. I always tell them what to do. So they're not, people have said, oh, you're so great to work with because, I'm super specific about what they, almost maybe to the point of where I should experiment more. But I tell them what to do, and sometimes when I look at the pictures, sometimes I see them as like so perfect that I'm wondering how did I even get that shot? Because probably with Brian on the Saint Sebastian kind of photograph there, I probably shot 10 pictures and then moved on. Because also during the day's shooting, I would have at least 2 or 3 or 4 locations where I wanted to photograph the models. So.
Thank you.
Hi.
Yeah, I wondered if George Platt Lyons was someone who, influenced you, especially these guys don't really look like they live in the period that they're living in necessarily. There's a kind of eternal, platonic ideal in all the bodies, on the one hand, and then it's kind of George Platt Lyons means Alvin Baltrop, and I wondered if you had been familiar with Baltrop's work on the Chelsea Piers especially, and if this is kind of the LA version in some ways of Baltrop's work on the piers. I wonder if that had influenced you.
Yeah, I don't know Baltrop's work, but I had a book of George Platt Lyons' work, and that, he photographed dance, he photographed celebrities at the time, and he photographed fashion. So he was definitely an influence. And also all black and white, of course. So, he was a big influence. The other photographer I'm not familiar with. I'll have to check out that work. Go ahead.
So as I look at these, they're beautiful. Thank you for sharing them. The architecture really jumps out to me when I look at these, and I was just curious if you have a record of each of the buildings and like where they were and what they are now.
No. It's kind of bad because I guess, of course I have all the negatives and I kept good track of the negatives, but many of the photos, I don't know what year they were done. So I know they were done between 81 and 85. And most of it I finished, I think only a few of the pictures were from 85. But I don't know, so yeah, I don't really know. Although I do know the one on Wilshire, and I remember that one. And I know that it's this kind of very boring office building across from the Wilton
I
Theater.
don't think it's boring at all.
No, but then the one that you said, the one with the guy running, in that space.
Oh, yeah.
You,
There's one of the figure running. That was taken at the time there was just east of downtown LA. There's a warehouse district, and they were building all these warehouses. I guess precursor to the Amazon buildings that we see now. But yeah, I photographed, so I know that area. And I actually did a whole bunch of architecture pictures in that same area where the running figure is. So I think the running figure was either one of the earlier ones or one of the later ones.
well,
Sure.
With inspiration, since you've been shooting male nudes for like 4 decades, do you find it more challenging finding inspiration 4 decades later, or is that something that comes easy to you for a new series, a new motivation, a new influence?
And that's a good question because it brings back something that we were kind of meaning to talk about that we missed. So through the whole process of this, I see like the freedom of youth in the pictures, and now when I'm photographing, I kind of censor myself because I think, oh, that's been done before. That's a cliche. So it's been great with this because I kind of think like now I shouldn't be censoring myself. And I try to be original too and try to create something that we haven't really seen. But at the same time, sometimes I think I should just be taking the picture with more freedom like I was then. So yeah.
I think that there's a lack of self-consciousness in this work that's
Right.
about youth.
Right.
And the older we get, the more it's like fearful and just worried about, oh wait, I don't want to do something that's been done or whatever. And I think that's a freedom that's definitely you're bringing back into your work now.
Right. But I still love taking pictures. So that's probably the best answer to your question.
He did do 3 books of portraits, male portraits, and then the 4th book was a book of nude male portraits, which is different than body studies because you're capturing a person, and it has to be about, yes, they're naked, but it's about their environment and it's about their personality. And so it was actually, I think, hard for you because sometimes the nudity becomes the elephant in the room, and you can't. That's what people focus on, and so to make beautiful portraits that are composed and yet they're nudes. I mean, I think that was an interesting challenge, and that body work is really great because of that. Again, that juxtaposition.
Right. And I think kind of what sets my nude photography apart from maybe others is it's never really being erotic is never the focus. It's always the figure in the space. It's always creating an amazing image, as opposed to like trying to create a sexy picture. So if there's a sexy picture, it's really, for me, it's the connection with the model. That's what's sexy. So, in fact, a lot of my first book was a reaction to sort of gay photography and models kind of like posing like kind of how they thought they should pose to be sexy, and I like to just strip it all down to the connection between model and the subject, a model and the viewer. So the model and the camera and how they are reacting and how they're connecting to me, the photographer, and again, in the picture, to the person looking at the photograph.
Time for one more.
Yeah.
When you were talking about your influences before, and you mentioned Robert Mapplethorpe, did you, when you took these, make a conscious effort then to not have any kind of, because some of his work was very graphic and some of it was
Very
pornographic,
sexual,
yeah,
yeah.
very sexual. So was there a concerted effort to make sure that there was nothing that, although influenced by him, that touched upon some of his material?
No, not a concerted effort. It's just that my perspective about nudity is never really sexual. It's always sexual because it's the nude, but like my focus is not to make a hot picture. It's to make a strong image, but it's not really about trying to be erotic.
You
So-
never cared about body parts. You're just not that guy at all.
Yeah. I'm a face person. There you go. Not a size queen.
Nope.
So there you go. And then, with that note,
Thank you guys for coming. Oh, another one.
Okay, I have to say, like, obviously, the 80s, we all went through a really rough time. These beautiful photographs and stuff, like you're going rogue when you're trying to get these shots with your models. Yet, everything seems so serene and full of hope, yet obviously there's despair in a lot of it. But no one seems nervous, like they're gonna get fucking caught. Did you ever get fucking caught?
no, we never got caught. There were times when there was a security guard on the site, but it was a huge site. So we just moved around from, but also back then the security guard just sat there. They weren't on their phone, but they were doing something. So, but
Well, I think that's the universe shining down on you as an incredible person. So,
thanks.
and thank you for bringing your
Thanks,
vision
Dad. Thanks,
and
Dad.
love to us.
Thanks, Dad.
Did any of the models forget where they put their clothes?
Not that I remember. But it's funny because thinking back, there's so much that I don't remember about the 45 years ago. So yeah, I wish I had a keener memory for long-term memory. So. All right.
That was one thing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
All right.
When you said about how these have, you were here more than gone. Last week, I took my sister to see the lead version.